2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 vanished without a trace, leaving the world in shock and raising questions that still remain unanswered today. On that fateful day of March 8th, the Boeing 777 carrying 239 passengers and crew mysteriously disappeared from radar shortly after takeoff from Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia to its planned destination, Beijing Capital International Airport in China. Despite extensive search efforts spanning thousands of miles, the plane's wreckage has never been found. Families of the passengers endured unimaginable agony, desperate for answers, as the world watched and speculated. The disappearance of Flight 370 sparked numerous conspiracy theories, from hijackings to alien abductions, captivating the public's imagination. Experts have analyzed the limited data available, suggesting possible
No distress call. No wreckage. Just silence. Then, weeks later, one passenger's phone was still ringing. They kissed their families goodbye, expecting a 6-hour flight to Beijing. But hours turned into days. Days into weeks. And the silence only grew louder. No emergency call. No beacon. No wreckage. Just a blinking dot that vanished over the sea. For the families left behind, it became a living nightmare. They were told to be patient. Told it was probably just a communications failure. But as time passed, one terrifying question took hold. Was it a mechanical error? A hijacking? Or something no one could explain? Tonight, we retrace the final known moments of Flight MH370. And follow the chilling trail of clues that were found. Long after the plane disappeared. It was a warm Saturday night in Kuala Lumpur. March 8, 2014, 12:41 a.m. local time. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 was preparing for takeoff from Kuala Lumpur International Airport. A Boeing 777-200ER, one of the safest and most reliable aircrafts ever built. On board were 239 souls, 227 passengers from 14 different nations, and 12 crew members. The destination, Beijing Capital International Airport. The passengers were a mix of vacationers, students, businessmen, and families heading home. There were 20 employees from a semiconductor company called Freescale. 5 children under the age of 5. And 2 men traveling on stolen passports. None of them knew this would be their last known departure. At 1:19 a.m., less than 40 minutes into the flight, Malaysian Air Traffic Control hands MH370 over to Vietnam's Ho Chi Minh Center. Captain Zahari responds with 7 now famous words. Good night, Malaysian 370. It is the last confirmed transmission from the plane. Less than 2 minutes later, the aircraft disappears from radar. No distress call. No warning. The plane simply vanishes. It is now 1:21 a.m. Somewhere over the South China Sea. MH370 is gone. The confusion began immediately, but quietly. In aviation, minor lapses in contact aren't uncommon. Air traffic control in Kuala Lumpur assumed the plane had entered Vietnamese airspace. But in Vietnam, they were waiting for MH370 to call in. By 1:37 a.m., Ho Chi Minh controllers tried to contact the aircraft. No reply. They made multiple attempts. Silence. They contacted other nearby aircraft to try to relay messages. Nothing. At 2:03 a.m., Vietnamese officials contacted Kuala Lumpur. We have no contact with MH370. Despite this growing alarm, no emergency was declared. It wasn't until 6:32 a.m., when MH370 failed to land in Beijing, that Malaysia Airlines finally acknowledged the plane was missing. Back in Beijing, the arrival gate filled with waiting families. Some had balloons. Some held flowers. Others carried sleeping babies who had stayed up all night to greet their parents. The digital arrivals board continued to blink. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 delayed. Then, Contact airline representative. Families were ushered into a private room. That's when the first whispers began. The plane had not landed. The plane could not be found. What started as mild confusion quickly turned into terror. Within 24 hours, the world was watching. One of the largest international airliners had vanished. With no explanation. And not a single piece of wreckage. How can a Boeing 777, nearly 64 meters long, just disappear? With GPS transponders, satellites, and dozens of countries monitoring airspace. It was a question no one could answer. And it was only the beginning. Day 1. No wreckage. Day 2. Still nothing. With every passing hour, hope faded, and confusion spread. The first assumption was obvious. MH370 must have crashed somewhere in the South China Sea, along its original flight path. Dozens of vessels and aircraft were deployed from Vietnam, China, Malaysia, and the Philippines. But not a single piece of debris was found. Not an oil slick. Not a floating panel. Nothing. Then came a shocking shift. Radar data from the Malaysian military showed the plane didn't crash immediately. It had made a sharp, deliberate turn, back over the Malaysian peninsula. Now, the search moved west, to the Strait of Malacca. And then came something even stranger. British engineers at Inmarsat, a satellite communications company, made an eerie discovery. Their network had logged something. A series of automatic signals from MH370's satellite data unit, called handshakes. Each one was a kind of digital knock. Sent from the plane, every hour. For 6 hours after it vanished from radar. These weren't full messages. Just a ghost signal, confirming the plane was still powered. Still flying. It had traveled thousands of miles, long past where anyone had been looking. And now, engineers had to determine one terrifying question. Which direction did it go? The implications were staggering. MH370 had flown for 7 hours after it lost contact. And it hadn't just drifted, it was following a course. It likely ended its journey in one of the most remote regions of Earth. A desolate stretch of the southern Indian Ocean. Cold. Deep. Unforgiving. But why would the plane go there? Who was flying it? And what happened in those missing hours? By now, one thing was clear, MH370 didn't crash where it was supposed to. It turned sharply, crossed back over Malaysia, flew up the Strait of Malacca, and vanished into darkness for hours. To make that kind of maneuver, turning off the transponder, switching frequencies, flying below radar, it wasn't luck. It was knowledge. So the question began to form. Was someone hijacking the plane? From inside the cockpit, experts pointed to how MH370's disappearance coincided precisely with a handover between air traffic controllers. A moment when no one was watching closely. The plane's ACARS system, used to transmit maintenance data, was shut off at 1:07 a.m. Then the transponder stopped at 1:21 a.m. What remained was silence. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, 53 years old. Over 18,000 flight hours. An experienced, well-respected pilot. And suddenly, the most scrutinized man on Earth. Authorities searched his home. What they found raised chilling questions. In his bedroom, investigators discovered a custom-built flight simulator. On that simulator, Zahari had plotted a strange and haunting course. A route eerily similar to MH370's final arc. Ending in the southern Indian Ocean. No suicide note. No confessional video. Zahari left no message, no warning. Just a shadow flight on a hard drive. And 239 souls never heard from again. But what if the cockpit wasn't the only place control was taken? In 2006, Boeing filed a patent for a system that would allow aircraft to be remotely controlled in the event of a hijacking. Once engaged, no one in the cockpit could override it. A chilling possibility emerged. Could MH370 have been electronically hijacked? There's no proof MH370 was electronically hijacked. But the technology exists. And so do the motives, for espionage, terrorism, even political manipulation. Some say it's unthinkable. Others say it's the only thing that makes sense. And that's the horror of it. The more we learn about MH370, the more every possibility seems both unlikely and frighteningly plausible. They waited in airport terminals, in hotel conference rooms, in their homes, desperate for anything, an update, a message, a sign. Some called their loved ones again and again. And the phones, they rang. They rang for days. How could a phone ring? If the plane was at the bottom of the ocean? But grief soon gave way to rage. Because from the very beginning, something didn't add up. It took 4 hours for Malaysian Airlines to admit the plane was missing. Then, another full day before authorities revealed it had turned around. Why the delay? What were they hiding? Families, especially from China, accused Malaysian authorities of incompetence, or worse, a cover-up. Some believed key radar data was withheld. Others pointed to the military. Why didn't they scramble jets when MH370 turned back across Malaysian airspace? What followed were conflicting timelines, contradictory reports, and vanishing explanations. Trust collapsed. Rumors exploded. And for the families left behind, hope was slowly being replaced by something far more painful. A sense they were being lied to. July 29, 2015. A tiny island in the Indian Ocean, Réunion Island, east of Madagascar. Locals stumble upon a battered, barnacle-covered piece of metal. A flapron, part of a Boeing 777's wing. The world reacts. Could this finally be proof of MH370's fate? Critics pointed out the part was eerily intact, no signs of explosive decompression, no jagged edges. The barnacles were young. Some oceanographers said they indicated the debris hadn't been drifting long enough to match the plane's timeline. So the question became, was this genuine wreckage? Or was it planted to close the case? Months later, more debris began appearing. Mozambique, Madagascar, Tanzania, South Africa. All pieces from a Boeing 777. But none revealed the full story. At the same time, beneath the waves, history's most expensive undersea search was underway. Over $200 million. A multinational effort involving Australia, China, and Malaysia. High-tech ships, deep-sea drones, side-scan sonar. They searched an area the size of Pennsylvania. But found nothing. After 1,046 days, the official search was called off. MH370 was still missing. As days turned to weeks and the trail went cold, a chilling possibility began to emerge. One whispered in dark corners and repeated with growing urgency online. What if MH370 was shot down? The theory began with radar anomalies. MH370 had deviated far off its flight path, flying west, then south, and possibly skimming restricted airspace. Some speculated that the aircraft veered too close to sensitive military installations. One such location drew particular attention, Diego Garcia, a heavily guarded U.S. military base in the Indian Ocean. Could the plane have been mistaken for a threat? Could it have been intercepted and silenced? The lack of communication. The transponder going dark. The delayed response from authorities. All became fuel for suspicion. Others pointed to debris, or the lack thereof. Why was it found so far from where officials said the plane likely crashed? Why did some parts appear in pristine condition while others showed signs of intense wear? The inconsistencies only deepened the mystery. Governments denied the theory outright. There was no evidence, they insisted. No radar track. No distress signal. Nothing unusual. But the secrecy surrounding military radar data only raised more questions than answers. To this day, the idea that Flight MH370 may have been brought down, accidentally or deliberately, remains one of the most polarizing theories. A scenario too horrifying to accept. And yet, not easily dismissed. But another theory, perhaps even more disturbing, slowly crept into the public psyche, one built not on foul play, but on silence. Total, absolute silence. What if everyone on board had already died, long before the plane reached the ocean? Some aviation experts proposed a grim scenario. A sudden cabin depressurization. Oxygen masks drop, but only for a limited time. The passengers, and even the crew, lose consciousness. The autopilot continues flying, blind, mechanical, and merciless. No one at the controls. No one aware. Just a machine soaring aimlessly through the skies, while 239 souls slept in eternal silence. It explained many things. The lack of a distress call. The eerie, perfect arc of the final path. The haunting satellite handshakes that suggested the plane was alive, even as the people aboard were not. Flight simulations showed how the autopilot could have maintained altitude for hours, before slowly guiding the aircraft into the sea when fuel ran dry. A ghost plane, flying itself to the edge of the earth. In this scenario, there is no villain. No hijacker. No sinister cover-up. Just failure. And death in silence. For families, the idea was equally heartbreaking. That their loved ones died slowly, quietly, and were never able to say goodbye. But for others, it was strangely comforting. A peaceful passing, instead of chaos. But still, why didn't the systems alert anyone? Why were tracking devices manually disabled? Why didn't the plane attempt an emergency landing if the pilots were still conscious? Like everything else about MH370, this theory answers some questions, and spawns dozens more. It was 8:19 a.m. on March 8, 2014, nearly 7 hours after MH370 had vanished from civilian radar. Somewhere, deep over the remote southern Indian Ocean, a final, desperate signal was received. A simple burst. A handshake. One last electronic ping to a satellite orbiting high above the Earth. It wasn't a distress call. It wasn't a radio transmission. It was an automated connection, like a phone buzzing in your pocket for a moment, only to fall silent. It would be the last confirmed trace of the plane. No coordinates. No voice. Just a final whisper from the void. Investigators would later trace that final ping to an approximate arc. An invisible curve stretching over one of the most desolate places on the planet. But where exactly along that arc the plane went down, no one could say. What happened in those final minutes? Did the plane run out of fuel and glide into the sea? Or did it spiral out of control, plunging thousands of feet in seconds? Some data hinted at a steep, high-speed descent. Others argued for a controlled ditching. But without the black boxes, there was no way to know. The ocean floor refused to give up its secrets. And so, at 8:19 a.m., Flight MH370, one of the most advanced commercial aircraft ever built, was simply gone. What happened to MH370? It's the question that still echoes across continents, across years. And yet, no answer has satisfied. Some still believe in a mechanical failure, an undetected fire, a cascading systems error, a freak event that overwhelmed the crew before they could respond. Others are convinced of darker forces. A hijacking, expertly executed and carefully planned, that flew the plane to a remote grave. Some hold on to the theory of pilot suicide, pointing to a suspicious flight simulator route and Zaharia Ahmad Shah's personal struggles. Others rejected outright, defending the pilot as a victim, not a villain. There are whispers of espionage, of stolen cargo or sensitive passengers who knew too much. There are those who still insist the plane was intercepted, accidentally or deliberately, by a foreign government that erased it from the skies. And then, there are the more extreme claims, secret landings, unknown islands, radar blips hidden from the public. A plane that never crashed, but vanished into a conspiracy. One theory even suggests the passengers were unconscious the whole time, victims of a depressurization that left them in a quiet coma while the aircraft flew itself to death. The only truth? We don't know. Not for sure. And the world may never know. Over a decade has passed. But Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 is not forgotten. Not by the world. And certainly not by the families who still wake up hoping today might bring answers. What makes this tragedy unbearable isn't just the loss of 239 lives, it's the silence that followed. No mayday. No wreckage. No goodbyes. An aircraft built to be tracked in real time disappeared in the era of GPS, satellites, radar, and smartphones. And somehow, not a single person, not a single system, could say exactly where it went, or why. It exposed flaws in global aviation. It exposed the limits of satellite surveillance. It exposed governments who hesitated, deflected, or withheld. But more than anything, it exposed how easily the impossible can become reality. In the wake of MH370, aviation regulations changed. Black box technology began evolving. New satellite systems were proposed. International cooperation was demanded. But none of those reforms can bring back the people who boarded that plane, never knowing it would be their last flight. No amount of technology can heal the scars left behind, scars etched into the hearts of wives, children, parents, and friends who still don't know how to grieve, because they don't know what happened. Was it mechanical? Intentional? Was it human failure, or something else entirely? Maybe one day, deep beneath the waves, the truth will be recovered. But until then, Flight MH370 remains a ghost. One that haunts the world's conscience. Somewhere out there, the truth is waiting. Not just for closure, but for justice. For peace. For history to be made whole. And until that day comes, we remember them. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe for more deep investigative documentaries. Like, share, and comment with your thoughts, because your voice keeps the search alive. To the families of MH370, we stand with you. To those still searching, we haven't stopped looking either.